Hey there, guys and gals of YouTube world. It is Monday, October the 4th in the year 2021. And today is actually the 25th anniversary of a milestone in my life. Can any of you guess what it is? If you guess it, I don't know, I'll let you know you got it right. Anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got my first, 5 or so rental properties, 5 doors. Okay. And we're going to go back in time a little bit to 2016. In 2016, I knew I was counting down to retiring in a couple years, and I was living in Virginia. But I knew, my wife and I, we had talked about it for a while, and we had talked about once we retire, where could we move to? Somewhere in the South. I didn't want to go to the North, somewhere to the South. So, in late 2016, I forget if it was October or November, I think it was probably October, maybe September even, we took a vacation to Savannah, Georgia, and spent 10 days there. We drove down, stayed in an Airbnb, spent time exploring the area, driving around neighborhoods, saying, okay, what if we did move here, et cetera, et cetera. But we stayed in an Airbnb on Tybee Island, which is just outside of Savannah, a little island. A hurricane had hit there like 10 days, 2 weeks prior to us getting there. So a lot of trees were down and whatnot, but we stayed in an Airbnb that had a big house, a little house, and a camper on the property. We were only in the big house, but I met the owner of the property there, and I remember talking to her, and she mentioned something about wanting to sell her property, and I was like, really? How much? So we discussed it. I said, I've been thinking about getting a rental property. And I don't remember exactly when I started thinking about it, but I've been thinking about it. And then we talked, and she got my email address, and we actually emailed, and I was considering it. She told me what the price would be, this and that. But I went on the Motley Fool after I got back home, onto some board, and posted something about potentially being interested in buying a rental property in the Tybee Island area, Savannah, Georgia area. And it was like 600 miles or 800 miles, 600 miles, I think, from where I lived at. And somebody responded to me and said, they had rental property, and they said, if this is your very first property, think about getting your first one close to where you live at, because you're going to make mistakes. And if it's that far away, are you going to be driving 600 miles, 500 miles, whatever it was, every time there's a problem? And I was like, that's good thought. So I ended up contacting a real estate agent I knew who owned some rental property, and we drove around. I identified, I think, like 10 properties that were all roughly around $100,000. It might have been the 90s, 110, somewhere in that range. And we looked at, I think it was 10 properties, might have been 12. And it was tiring just looking at them. But the very first one we looked at the end, I said something to her. It's like, do you mind if we go back to that very first house? Because we both said that was probably the nicest house that we saw. So we went back to it. I remember talking to her, standing in the kitchen talking to her, and she owned some rental property, and she told me, in her opinion, she thought this would be a good rental property. Okay, so I put an offer in to buy it. It was like $97,500 was the price we agreed on. But then, leading up to this, I think I made this move. I can't remember, because remember I mentioned before in videos, I never read a real estate book. I never found a real estate website. I intentionally said to myself, I'm going to do this on my own. I'm not going to look for, I know I love reading, but I said I'm not going to read any, I'm just going to do it. Just going to do it. And I did it. But somehow I got an idea. The local credit union had been advertising HELOCs, home equity lines of credit. And I started, some reason something triggered up here, and I started looking at them, and I was like, HELOCs. So I was like, what exactly is this? And I called the bank, or the credit union, asked them. They explained to me what a HELOC was. It would be a line of credit. I'd have to apply for it if it got approved. It's like a credit card. I could tap into the money when I needed it, but once I withdraw some, then I got to pay it back with interest. But it's a low interest rate, and there was no cost to open up a HELOC. I didn't have to pay any closing costs or anything. So I was like, I'm interested possibly, because I thought about it. It's like, could I use some of that HELOC for my down payment on this house? Because I had roughly $25,000-ish in cash, roughly in the bank. I knew I had stocks that I could sell if I had to, but I had that much cash, and I was like, well, if I get a HELOC, I'll get a small one, and I could use a portion of it for my rental house. And I remember talking to the folks in the credit union, can I use this for anything? And they said, yes, anything you want to. Like, okay. So when I got approved for that, to buy that house, and I put the down payment down, 20% down on a $97,000 house was just under 20 grand, and then closing costs were, say, roughly, I don't know, 5 grand, whatever it was. I'm thinking it was like $16,000, $17,000 or $18,000 from my HELOC towards that down payment. My reasoning was, I was like, well, if I use HELOC money, it's a very low interest rate, and I keep my cash. And then I can just pay extra to get it paid back, but I keep that cash in case, because I knew I need to put a roof on the house and do some other stuff. That way I'd have the money. So that's what I did. And when I got my rent check in, I would always pay like $100 or something towards my HELOC. And the payment was like $75 or $50. And I'd always pay like $100 or $125, whatever I paid. And then my very first tenant was the professional tenant who decided not to pay rent. And I'm not going to tell the whole story here, but I had to evict her. And she hung on to the very last 24 hours with the deputies that come out to the house and tell her to get out, and et cetera, et cetera. But she finally moved out. And I closed on my first house in January 2017. And this took probably until April or probably May of 2017 when I got her out. She paid 2 months rent, I believe, starting in February. So February, March, April, and May, she didn't pay. End of May, she got out. Real quick then, within a week or 10 days, I got new tenants in there that was a family. And they were good tenants. They paid all the rent for the next 12 months. They were good people. Because after that first tenant, I was kind of like, do I keep this house? Is it worth it? I mean, there's actually people out there that won't pay the rent, and I got to evict them. I didn't like evicting somebody. I'd gone to court, and I was a cop, but I didn't like doing that. So, but as the months went on, I kept getting a rent check. I was like, well, that's kind of fun. So then I decided, let me contact my real estate friend and maybe see if there's a second house. So the second house, we looked at some, but we couldn't find a good one. And then she called me up and said, I think it was her pastor knew of a young lady that was living in a house that had fallen on hard times, domestic problems, and she had to get rid of her house. And she had paid cash to buy it, but she had to get rid of it. And when I went to look at it, it was my wife and I. The real estate agent met us at the door and was like, she said something like, it can always be cleaned, and ignore the smell, it can be cleaned. And I walked in there, and the place was a mess. It stunk. It was a mess. They had dogs, and it stunk. But the house, 3 years prior, had been renovated with high-quality carpet, new roof on the house. The basement, it was a walkout basement. They cut the wall and put in French doors. They did other improvements, put in a radon mitigation system, and they did some other things. So we were like, wow, it stinks. It's dirty. She has a bunch of crap in there, excuse my language, a bunch of stuff in there. But it's like, if we get it cleaned out, it could be a good house, and painted, fresh paint. So I bought it. It was, again, $97,000 or $97,500. One of my two houses was $97,000, one was $97,500. I forget which one was which. So I bought that house. And then the young lady living in there did get moved out, but I had to help her with, I didn't pay for it, but there was people I knew that got her stuff out. She did not want her stuff, so I sold some of her stuff, and she didn't even want the money. So I sold stuff and just pocketed the money, and I sold it cheap. But once we bought the house and we went in, I paid somebody to paint it. We did some minor repairs. A bedroom door had been busted, a bathroom door had been busted. It was violent. So we replaced 2 doors, replaced door trim. Front door had been kicked in, replaced the door trim. Cleaned it up, painted it, vacuumed it, steamed, cleaned the carpet, cut out some vines that were growing on a fence line, cut them back, and my son and I did that. And then found tenants that moved in there starting like January 1st of 2018, it would have been. So they moved in. And then by this time, I found the website biggerpockets.com. And I was reading stuff on there, and I was like, oh, multifamily. Maybe I could get a multifamily. And so I contacted my realtor friend again as the spring was coming. And I was like, are there any multifamilies here in the area? You know, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. And she said, they're hard to find. There are some, but we're in a small area. The folks that get them, they hold on to them. They're hard to find. But then she said, let me do some checking. And she had someone she knew that had a triplex that wanted to sell it. It wasn't listed on the MLS. So I went there. I saw it. It was a mess. It stunk. All 3 apartments stunk. All 3 apartments needed work. All 3 apartments had tenants that I did not like. They were low quality tenants. So anyway, I made an offer to buy this. And this was, let's just say, roughly $200,000. So here lies the question. How did Mazske pay the down payment on that? What I did on this one, I bought this in May of 2018. I retired from my job as a police officer on April 1st of 2018. While being a cop, I had a 457 plan. I put a little bit of money into it for 20 years. You know, sometimes it's $50 a month, $75 a month. There was one time I increased it to 125, and then I had to back it down because money got tight. But over 20 years, it grew. And so I found out I could withdraw my money when I retired, but I'd have to pay federal and state tax on it. So I withdrew the entire thing. When I retired April 1st, within a week, I was withdrawing it all. Had the money transferred to my account. They held out federal and state tax. And then I used that money for my down payment to buy the triplex. And so that's how I got my triplex. That was 3 units, 3 doors. So I had 2 single family homes and a triplex. So I had 5 units. Okay. And I'll continue the story about the triplex in a future video because I end up doing a lot of work to that building over the next year or 2. And I am in the process now. I'm going to be selling it hopefully at the end of 2021. So that's enough for this video. I will do a second follow-up video for telling the story of how I got more rental properties. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. We shall see. Okay? All right. Y'all stay safe. Keep loving life. Mazske is signing out.